I'd like to call the Tuesday, February 20th, 2024, regular council meeting of the East Lansing City Council agenda to order. At the start of the meeting, could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Altman. Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh.
Here.
Mayor Brookover.
Here. Item 1.2, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the agenda.
Moved by Meadows. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Singh. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item 1.3, approval of the minutes of the regular council meeting of February 6th, 2024. Do we have a motion and/or any changes or modifications?
Move approval.
Dr. Altman moves approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Meadows. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Communications. We have in our packet all written communications received by the council, and they're also posted online. Communications from the audience. I have one slip from Mr. Sardar.
Good evening. Tahsin Sardar, 2822 Marfit Road. This morning, yet again, we witnessed the moral collapse of the U.S. on the world stage when our ambassador to the UN vetoed a Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. This was the third time in 137 days, and the U.S. was the only country to vote against the resolution. We stand isolated when 153 countries from around the world want to see an end to the plausible genocide. We were disappointed when our city council did the same in this very room last month. There were several opportunities to reconsider the resolution. Councilmember Dana Watson had passionately made the case for it on January 9th, and at least two other council members said that they were in agreement to consider one. We were told that it is beyond the scope of the city's charter to have a say on the affairs overseas. I did a simple search on the city's own website, and it showed that we have passed resolutions about the Armenian genocide consecutively in the last 3 years. And as I had mentioned last time when I was here to make a comment, we did pass resolutions against the apartheid in South Africa as well. As the city's online resolution archive doesn't go past 3 years, I can't tell if there are more resolutions of this nature. And quite frankly, when it comes to preserving life, no matter where in the world, we should not be finding excuses to dodge it and even block it against the will of the majority of the people, majority of the East Lansing residents who came out here and spoke in support of the resolution. Quite to the contrary, we should be guided by our moral conscience to discuss and address such issues. Several major cities across Michigan have passed a ceasefire resolution. Just last week, Lansing City passed one as well. With every passing day, scores of Palestinians are being killed. Tomorrow, you're going to be hearing from some of our lawmakers who have changed their positions, and they're going to be asking for a ceasefire. And based on the technicality that I just pointed out, that there is a precedent in East Lansing to pass resolutions on overseas matters, I urge you to reconsider the draft resolution from January 9th and put it to vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak? Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
I'll send this out and give it to you afterwards. Karen Honey, 963 Lilac. And I am also on the Human Rights Commission with Thaseen. And I'm just going to, we submitted a written correspondence, and I'm just was here to read that written correspondence out loud for public record. Dear Mayor Brookover and members of the East Lansing City Council, more than 6 weeks ago, the Human Rights Commission submitted to you a resolution calling for a ceasefire that we had written and unanimously passed. Council subsequently voted down by a 4-to-1 vote this resolution. At the time, Council members Meadows and Ebersol Singh both indicated a willingness to pass the resolution, just not the draft we submitted. However, we have not yet received communication from any member of Council to discuss this proposition. One of the pillars of the HRC, the Human Rights Commission, is to protect and promote human dignity and respect for the rights of all individuals and groups. The resolution goes directly to a primary function of our body. Furthermore, while we concede this conflict primarily occurs overseas, its ramifications flow through our community as East Lansing residents grieve. We respectfully request that you either reconsider and pass our resolution, write and pass your own ceasefire resolution, or join the Human Rights Commission at the earliest possible opportunity in a special meeting so that we can work together to write a resolution that council would be willing to pass. Based on written and spoken comment we have received and a petition that was circulated, a majority of community members that have weighed in on the matter support such a resolution. Additionally, many constituents indicated their support for such a resolution. As of this date, more than 70 cities in the U.S. have passed ceasefire resolutions, including our next door neighbors in Lansing, the city of Ann Arbor, and large metropolitan cities like Chicago and San Francisco. Palestinian civilians continue to be killed at an alarming number as each day passes, and Israeli hostages continue to be imprisoned. We urge you to partner with us and join cities across the country in attending to this crisis. We will follow up this email with public comment at the next city council meeting and sincerely hope we will have a forward motion to report at that time. Thank you. From the
Thank you
Human
for
Rights
coming.
Commission.
Thank you. Sir? Is there somebody else that wanted to comment? Okay. Anybody else in the audience? Anybody in the queue?
Yeah, we have one caller in the queue.
Thank you.
Caller with a number ending in 954, you're welcome to address council.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm unmuted. I apologize. There's to always be an echo. I'll speak slowly. This is Nicole Kiwe Biber, living on Blanchette Street. I certainly do hope that to hear some comments from City Council that the very, even-handed and sensible suggestions just heard from the previous two speakers are that they're, take them up on it. Makes a lot of sense to have a discussion of how to come to a place where the resolution feels like it represents people and if you're elected into a role of representation, there's a certain amount of leadership in that, and I think that's what people are looking for. And good way to come to that is discussion and to take someone up on it, especially a group that's been appointed to, be looking over sort of the matters that are often difficult to contend with in the larger world. We can't ignore it. We shouldn't ignore it. We're advised not to, that's for sure. Just looking at the agenda, a lot of things I noticed always seem to have to do with development. I'll put our minds again, hopefully, towards the very great need for restoration being taken just as seriously as an issue. More so, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear me say, at this time, unfortunately, we are still steadily going forward on the path that has put us at the sixth mass extinction, a biodiversity crisis. There's a lot of different ages in this community. The elder among you, think about how many fireflies maybe you used to see and how many you see now. The ones of us who have children, what do you want them to grow up with? Guaranteed funding for ever more pavement? Or would you like to see it something turn around to where it's seen and taken seriously that small decisions can make a big difference? So as you consider these contracts and these monies set aside for making sure the pavement can happen and, what should we do to develop this bit of land? All of these seem to come with something like, after the digging and whatnot is done, what happens? There's a button at some point that's pressed on a computer or the screen where it says, order the seed for turf grass. Maybe it even comes with non-native landscaping. Maybe that unfortunately comes with putting chemicals on it that are unnecessary. And part of the reason why we've had 60 to 90% of really important pollinators, those populations have plummeted in just the past 10 years. So, if there's anything in ordinances that says you can't have this sort of planting, maybe get rid of that. That's pretty outmoded. and really irresponsible. Because as I say, we're still at a really crisis point. Adjustments that can be made really should be made. It doesn't seem to make it on the agenda, but it's long overdue of something that can be, another area of leadership, since we're already considering ourselves our pollinator-friendly community. Let's get going with that. People out there listening to this who think it's not important, it really is. We're not the only ones here. Those animal lives are also part of this community. So I'd like to see, some real steps be taken that maybe can say, hey, if you plant something here, or if you dig up an area of ground, replace it with habitat. Small switch, it can make a big difference. All right, thanks.
Thank you for your attention. Anybody else in the queue?
There are no other callers in the queue.
Okay, moving on. Communications from the mayor and council members. Councilperson Watson.
Oh. I get surprised by the order.
Well, I changed the order.
You do change it.
Is that bad?
No, it's not. It's not. I just get, before we would always kind of go in the same order. So, on Friday, a couple days ago, I was invited to a Black History Month event with Everybody Reads as an East Lansing City Councilwoman who is also a part of Black History. The authors that were featured also wrote books. One is called True and Curious Story of Irish Alice, a Colored Man's Widow, and another author of the title Sparkle in Their Eyes, Raising Talented, Diverse Students in STEAM Careers. And so it was just a great, beautiful event. And again, it was hosted at Everybody Reads, and I'm glad I was able to be invited and be a part of it. I also learned of another event that's being hosted at the East Lansing Public Library. And this is an event that's in connection to the Justice League on Wednesday, February 28th, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. There is going to be a panel discussion on reparations fund and also addressing the community's racial wealth gap. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilperson Singh.
Good evening. Just a couple of things. I want to first echo the city's press release that went out today that the Crystal Award nominations, you have one more week to submit nominations. And again, this is to support and honor those who strive to make the city of East Lansing a more welcoming place to live, work, and do business. 4 categories: community, business, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the spirit of East Lansing. Go to the website, City of East Lansing, Crystal Award nominations to make those, so you got a little bit more time. Want to give a shout out, just because I know I've valued these events in the past, the Children's Cultural Concert Series, which is kicking off this Saturday from 11 to 11:45 for the next 3 Saturdays. So again, just wanted to echo these awesome community events and amenities that we have here. Also, our library board, we have a meeting tomorrow at 4:30 for those interested in participating in that work. They're looking at approval of an RFP for strategic planning, some audio-visual updates, and also to authorize an application for special liquor license events. So for those that are interested in those issues, that's what we have going on that agenda tomorrow. And 2 last things. One, I just wanted to call out additional Michigan State University Black History Month events. Their events are pretty much coming to a close on the 23rd, but tomorrow, Wednesday the 21st, you have a number of speaking series with the annual William G. Anderson Lecture Series that you should go to their website to take a look at the details around that. And then a last event on Friday at 5 p.m. For their lecture series, Slavery to Freedom, and American Odyssey. So Last, but certainly not least, is early voting, and I don't even see our clerk here, but I know she'll be really excited, as well as her team. Early voting for the presidential primary has kicked off, though there are 2 locations in the city of East Lansing, 405 Grove Street, as well as the STEM building on MSU's campus. Those early voting hours are from 8:30 through 4:30 p.m. And I know I was just at the University Student Commission meeting, and we said, hey, students, vote before spring break, before you leave for spring break. So just want to call out and make mention of those opportunities. So with that, that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Councilperson Meadows.
I'll be a little bit shorter. I do want to report a little bit on the Youth Commission because, I think on most commissions, commissioners say, boy, it's only a 1-month meeting. The Youth Commission decided they want to meet twice a month. They're very enthusiastic about participating in East Lansing, and they're setting their own priorities. I've had 2 discussions with regard to that, and I want to bring to the attention of the public. The Youth Commission would like us to reestablish an Earth Day event, which we used to have in the city of East Lansing, as an opportunity for young people to volunteer and participate in the beautification of our community, and to restore what was originally known as Project Pride and later East Lansing Recycles within our community, rather than partner with Lansing so that it would be more available to our citizens and provide another volunteer opportunity for young people within the community. So I bring those to everybody's attention. I know we can have a discussion about that at some point later, but I think there's a lot more to come from this group. I think it's been very dynamic so far. There's a lot of great kids on there.
Councilperson Altman.
Thank you, Mayor. No report.
And I have no report. City Manager report.
Just to echo, hats off to the city clerk, the staff, the election workers for dedication for these 9 days of early voting. Thank you.
City Attorney report.
No report this evening, thank you.
Item number 3.1 is a special presentation, of the general fund 5-year financial forecast covering fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2029. And Mr. City Manager, just to sort of translate in our segue for the general public, I assume that this is your beginning salvo in our budget process to give us sort of a view from 100 miles up in terms of what we might expect in the next 5 years. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So tonight, Penny Wright couldn't make it, so Audrey Kincaid, Deputy Finance Director, and several others, Justin Geiger, Andrea Smith, Treasurer, and David Lee will also partake in the presentation.
Well, you stole my first 3 sentences that
Okay,
I
there
have
you go.
listed here.
Just trying to shorten it for you.
Yeah,
That's okay, so now you're down to like 7 sentences?
sure.
Okay.
Audrey Kincaid, Deputy Finance Director. Like the city manager said, Penny's not able to be here, but we have a finance contingent that hopefully can answer some of your questions. And this is our official kickoff to the fiscal year 25 budget season. So with that, next slide. So I've prepared a presentation tonight to start that forecast. A lot of it is somewhat repetitive of what's in the actual forecast document, but providing a little bit of additional context and a little historical viewpoint for some of these items as well. So what we're looking at tonight is specifically the general fund, does not include any income tax except for items that are transferred to the general fund. So we're just talking general fund tonight. Within the document, we have risk and uncertainties, which are our high-level macro items that might be affecting the budget, our noteworthy items that are our specific one particular items that are affecting us as a specific city, The assumptions that we use, which are by particular item, the actual calculations and assumptions we use to create that 5-year forecast. Then we have the forecast itself. We have additional assessing information, which give you the backstory to our property tax information. And then at the very back of the packet is the more specific revenue and expenditure detail that gives you a little bit more information about what's in that forecast. If you have specific questions on fluctuations, there's a little bit more detail of what makes up each of those categories. Next slide. So this is a high-level look at our forecast. Obviously, it shows our future 5 years, but it includes our fiscal year 23 actuals, where our 24 budget is today, and then what our assumptions are for 24, and then those 5 future years. We build the first year off of our revenue is built off of our 24 assumptions, our 24 estimates, and then our assumptions from there. And then our same thing for operating costs is built off of our 24 expectations with some assumptions built in. Now, personnel for fiscal year 25, we've already done a lot of work in our budgeting module to say what positions we actually think we're going to need. We actually have COLAs built in there, so those are a little bit more solid, firm numbers, and they'll get refined as we go through the budget process. The revenue and operating expense numbers are a little softer, but still using the current expectations as our basis. So then next slide. The first major thing to talk about in the forecast for revenue is property taxes. So I'm going to turn that over to Dave Lee to kind of give you the backstory on assessing information that comes up with those property tax numbers.
Good evening, Dave
Can I
Lee.
just ask you a question?
Yep.
Okay, so again, to sort of set the stage for this, for all of us and the public. So on the handout you have, which is on the screen, we now are about to enter into the planning for fiscal year 2025. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so for us and the public to make comparisons, like the city assessor is going to do shortly, we would compare the fiscal year 2024 expectation column all the way through expenditures to your fiscal year 2025 column all the way through expenditures, correct? Understanding that some of the numbers are soft, et cetera, et
Yep,
cetera.
correct.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure I understood where we were. Thank you, David. Thanks.
Sure. Good evening, Dave Lee, City Assessor. So my part in the forecast is to try to determine and try to project what the taxable value for the city is going to be for the next 5 years. So I can walk you through that briefly, and then, of course, if you have questions. Starting at page 14, there's a list of historical assessed and taxable values over the last dozen years or so. And I think what's kind of important to pull from that information is that the ratio of taxable value to state equalized value has become lower and lower each year as so I guess in general, good market circumstances for real estate, the assessed value increases faster than the capped or taxable value. And over time, then there gets to be a gap between assessed and taxable value. And that gap has become larger and larger. You can see that the ratio of SEV to taxable value, or taxable value to SEV, sorry, for residential and commercial properties is about 80%, 81, 82%. So what that means is that when a property transfers ownership, in the year following that transfer ownership, the property's taxable value gets uncapped, and there gets to be a larger and larger increase for the new owner, which figures into these calculations that I'm about to talk with you about.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you.
Sure.
Because I just want to try to keep setting the stage. So when there is no transfer, let's just take a residential property. There is no transfer, yet we see this incredible growth in value. You will assess an increase in value as you go through the years, correct? But there's a cap on how much we can tax.
Sure. So maybe I can explain a little further. So there are two values that are important on every taxable parcel property. There's the assessed value and the taxable value. Assessed value is 50% of market value, and that's it. It's completely tied to market value. There's no limit to how much that can increase or decrease from one year to the next. Taxable value is the important one because that's what everybody's taxes are based on. And that is, it's kind of a complicated, but it's based on a formula in the law whereby if you make no physical changes to that property, the most it can increase from one year to the next is 5% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. Okay, so that's the inflation rate multipliers that are listed in the far right column on page 14. You can see there that the inflation rate multiplier for 2023 was 1.05. That's the maximum, and it is the maximum again this year. So again, that kind of figures into how large the taxable value increases are going to be this year for people. And I guess getting more to your, maybe a little more direct answer to your question. So if you take, for example, the typical or the average residential increase in assessed value for this year, for 2024, it's about 9.9%, which is very large, obviously. The taxable value for property owners, if they have not experienced a transfer of ownership and have not made any physical changes to their property, it's going to be a 5% increase. So they benefit from that, but it's still a large increase for people. And it also figures into the budget process. So hopefully that answers your question, and I appreciate the question. Okay, so when we do the taxable value forecast, we try to break it in, we approach it two ways. We look at the value increase from existing property in the city, and that's kind of presented for you on page 15, where we look at the commercial and residential classes of property, existing property in the city, and then we project out for the next 5 years, hopefully with reasonable and conservative projections, what the taxable value increases will be for each year. So you can see for the 2024 year, we're projecting about a 6% increase in taxable value for residential property and about a 1.5% increase for commercial property. And then for the next year out, 3% for residential property and 1.5% for commercial property. And then in future years, 1.5% for both classes. And we try to be conservative in those projections because we do not want to overstate revenues for projection purposes. That would put us in a bad situation. So we try to be as conservative as possible and still be realistic. Okay, so then on page 16 is kind of the second half of the projections. And what this is a list of new construction projects and areas where new construction is occurring, or for this year, for 2024 and future years. Two things to note here. We try to be conservative, so we only include here things that are known that are actually occurring or very likely to occur over the next 5 years. And then we also do not include any new construction projects within capture districts, such as brownfields or the DDA, because the city won't see anything in terms of tax increase in the near term for those projects. And then turning to page 17, you have kind of that table there presented on page 17 is a summary of those two that I just talked about. So you got a summary of the taxable value growth on existing property, and then combined with the taxable value growth projected from new construction to give you an estimate of taxable value for the next 5 years. So that's my spiel. If you have any questions.
Go ahead. In the table on page 16, I'm not sure I understand why some of the cell entries are zero, unless it's an increment from year to year.
So looking at maybe the first one,
Yeah.
so the item 1 is that office park development. There isn't anything that's going to occur within that for tax year 2024. There's no new construction in there, but there is some vacant parcels within that development, which we anticipate could be developed in the next 5 years.
Right, but then in the out years, in 29, you go from $800,000 to zero. You go back to zero.
Right, so it's a good question. There's a limited number of vacant parcels within that development. And so only a certain number can be, and if the projections hold true for 27 and 28, fiscal year 27 and 28, there won't be anything left for 2029. That development will be completely filled.
So these are all deltas?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I also have a question. And I don't think I'm looking at the same things you're Dave, but I'm looking at the property taxes that in the revenue history that's in this handout that we received. But it appears that in terms of the total general fund revenue, property taxes plus the makeup from the income tax provision in the charter, that we've continued to have growth in sort of the equivalent of the property taxes throughout this sort of period of time that COVID gave us of uncertain revenue sources. Is that what you see as well?
Generally, yes, that's my knowledge. I don't have those figures right in front of me, but
Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the public knew that we haven't fallen backwards, really. We've continued to grow in our revenue sources with that combination that they put into place.
With respect to property taxes, that's certainly true.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question. This is a little bit farther afield, but you mentioned taxable value versus assessed value, and assessed value is half the true market value. How well does assessed value correlate with actual purchase price for properties?
We would hope perfectly.
Okay. All right.
But that's not the case, right? I mean, the way I try to explain purchase price to people is that if people come to me all the time, especially this time of year, and say, we bought it for X, the market value therefore is X. And that's not really true. And the way I try to explain it to people is if you have the same property, which hypothetically had 10 different owners on day X and 10 different purchasers on that same day, you would have 10 different sale prices, most likely, because you're going to have 10 different people with 10 different motivations in terms of desire to sell, desire to buy, and where those things intersect, that's the purchase price. And that's going to differ, even with the same property on the same date, hypothetically, it's going to differ. So what we tell people is a sale price or the market value of the property is the usual selling price of the property. And that's what we try to estimate. I make no claim that we're always 100% on top of that or accurate with that. Overall, we're accurate with it. You know, if you look at the entire class of residential properties, we have pretty accurate assessments, if that answers your question.
It does, and then the follow-up is, do you have a sense of what the deviation tends to be? Is it 5 or 10%, like a standard deviation? Would you say 5 or 10%, or?
I would say it's the standard deviation?
Yeah, standard deviation.
No, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I hate to be quoting statistics, but on average, our assessments are between 49 and 50%. They're studied every year, especially with residential assessments. We get 99% of the sale prices into our office, and we use that information to determine assessments for the next year. So I think we're very accurate overall, if that.
That helps, thank you. And then the trend in residential properties is a lot steeper than the trend in commercial properties. Is that nationwide? Or is it something special about East Lansing?
No, I think that's nationwide, definitely here in East Lansing. So you have a residential market where you have a very scarce number of markets now that are scarce number of properties that are on the market, which is driving the prices of those properties up.
Right.
And meanwhile, you have a very softening office market due to COVID and work from home. And so that's kind of working in the opposite direction. So two different markets and one market, two different classes of property going in not different directions, but varying.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
And it is correct, is it not, that residential and commercial customers can challenge your assessment?
Sure,
And there's
absolutely.
a specific legal process set out under state law for that. correct?
Absolutely. So we have an assessor's review. I'll just plug that while I'm here. We have an assessor's review, which is an informal opportunity for people to approach us in the assessing department and question or discuss their assessment or protest their assessment with us informally. We do that each year before the Board of Review. And the Board of Review is their more formal opportunity to appeal to the city's Board of Review. 5 members of the community will hear their appeal. And then there's further appeal process from that if people are not satisfied.
Okay, thank you. Any other, go ahead, I'm sorry.
For the commercial property piece of this equation, are we seeing more consistency in terms of versus other cities with more offices hosted in their commercial property?
More consistent growth, do you mean?
Yes.
I would say most likely, yes. We certainly have an office component of our commercial class. We also have a lot of apartments
Right.
and student housing, which has gone crazy over the last 5-10 years. So that offsets certainly any softness in the commercial market.
Yep.
Any other questions? You all set?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. So I'll mostly be focusing on that main forecast document for the remainder of the presentation. As I said, the assumptions will really give you a good idea of what we use to produce those outer year numbers. But what I'd like to do is just highlight a couple of those kind of near-term items that may grab your attention because they look a little skewed or look a little odd. So I'm not planning on going through every item, but if there's a particular item that you'd like to talk about that I'm not mentioning, just stop me. So we'll start with revenues first. And since we've already talked about property tax, I'm actually going to drop down to the PA 289 fire protection revenue number. So this is based off of a couple of different items, and there's a calculation. And historically, we've had some concerns about it being funded, and not so distant past, it was only 50% funded, and it's been fully funded for several years, so we're assuming that it will continue to be fully funded. The other component of that is it's based off of our fire department's expenditures. So in past years, we've had substantial supplemental pension payments coming out of the fire department. Those have tapered off in the general fund as the income tax fund has been able to pick up those supplemental payments and contribute up to about $5 million out of just the income tax. So those have tapered off, so reducing the fire department's expenditures. So that's why you'll see that, and so there's a 1-year lag. So the revenue that we're seeing in fiscal year 24 is based off of last year where we had a quite significant supplemental pension payment out of the general fund. And this year we had budgeted a smaller amount, but we're actually choosing not to make that payment out of the general fund because the income tax will fully cover that $5 million is our expectation. So the expenditures for the fire department are going to be decreasing slightly. So next year's PA 289 will be based on a smaller expenditure number.
Could I ask a question on that
Sure.
point? Does that mean that we should be trying to spend more money in the fire department to get greater 289 reimbursements?
That is a strategy, certainly. Yes.
Should we be doing that?
It has piqued my interest to have that conversation, yes.
Okay, all right.
I hate to leave state money on the table.
Yeah, no kidding, especially if they're willing to fully fund 289, we
Yeah.
should be
Right.
grabbing it.
All right.
That would be a first, so.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to skip down to charges for services, also related to the fire department in a positive way. We've switched our ambulance service billing provider, and they are doing an excellent job recouping our billings. And so we are seeing almost $1 million increase at the end of last year. And we're seeing that same trend continue this year. So we're hoping that that will continue out into the future. No changes to service, just continual collections.
And that was recommendation of our fire chief, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, just-
That change occurred last
I
year.
just want to give her kudos about that because
Yeah. Then our other revenue number, so interest income is included in that other revenue number, and that has had a significant fluctuation in the last few years due to the market. We've had historically high returns this year. So that is a significant risk in outer years. We're assuming that's going to stay flat. It may decline in outer years, but we're taking the benefit now. Then in fiscal year 23, that other revenue number also includes a one-time recording of the issuance of long-term liability. So this is an accounting rule where a lease, if we issue a lease, so we issued a lease for fire equipment, we have to recognize the proceeds for the issuance of the lease and then recognize an offsetting value of the underlying assets as capital outlay. So it's kind of a net neutral revenue and expense, but it obviously makes that revenue line look very large in the prior year. So in the details in the back, you'll see that pop out pretty significantly. And then grant revenue is always fluctuating, but in a really positive way this year. We were awarded and received the Protecting Michigan Pension Grant for almost $7.7 million this year. So we are recognizing that revenue in fiscal year 24 with an offsetting expense we'll talk about later in the supplemental pension section. But so that's a swing of $7.5 million. And then also in fiscal year 24, we're also expecting to apply our ARPA funding for police and fire wages. So that's almost $5.8 million that will apply to police and fire wages. So it'll be recognized as revenue in the general fund to cover those things. So I'm going to pause here on revenue. Any other particular items that you'd like me to discuss or anything else that grabbed you?
Go ahead.
I noticed that marijuana taxes was added to property taxes. I'm used to seeing that as its own line item. So can we see it as its own line item?
Sure, and if you look in the back detail, it is broken out, so it is available there.
And what page is that? Is that the page you gave or the link?
18?
18 on this one?
On the report.
On the full, the orange covered one.
Okay. All right, I'm not sure. So we've got a paper one that's different from the one online, the link
So this
online?
is just the presentation that it was just submitted as an add-on today. So this was just kind of that extra context, but this is the actual forecast
Okay,
document that
so
was online.
page 18 online.
Correct.
All right, thank you. And my other, just a heads up, as we are going into budgeting sessions, there's been discussions that I haven't been privy to since I've been on council as far as like fines and fees. And so just a heads up, like I'll just be asking for more detail on how that's happening, like who's getting ticketed and who's not, and where we're generating those type of revenues from.
Any other questions? Okay.
Next slide, please. So now I have just a couple of additional context items that are just in that add-on presentation. So this gives you a look back to 2007, right before the economic issues in 2008, and you can see where the city was at, and then that gray line above is how that revenue in 2007 would have grown at a core average inflation rate, and the bar graphs below are where the city's revenues were actually for all of these historical years. Now, our 24 estimate is super exceeding that core inflation average number, and that is a direct result of those two grant items I mentioned with the Protecting Michigan Pension and then the ARPA funds for police and fire wages. So those are two large one-time only revenue. So I would fully expect if you had the fiscal year 25 numbers on here that it would fall just below that bar again, that gray line again. Next slide. Yep.
So what's the point of that? Are you saying that that our revenue has been underneath the
Correct.
rate of inflation for that entire time period?
Correct.
Okay, and why is that important?
I think it just shows where the city, has been and where they've come to. I think it shows that the income tax, that red bar in the last 5 years at the top, has been a significant source of revenue and needed source of revenue for the city. Just know that we've got a large gap to fill, and we're making progress, but it's certainly not, we're not flush.
Okay, thank you.
I think if I can add too, is on the expense side, you see expenses growing at a much more rapid pace than we're seeing the revenue. And that's why you see some use of fund balance throughout future years.
Next slide, just in case you're a numbers person and like numbers instead of pictures, this is that same information, just represented in a table. And then next slide, back to revenue, but I believe we covered all of our revenue questions. So then we can move on to expenditures.
Do you have a number, if you were to subtract the one-time grants like ARPA, what on average would we see from grants?
If we go to that page 20, I would say you could back out about 12 million. So I think 1 to 2 million is pretty typical. I mean, it really is just dependent on what's available at the time. Some, fire department has had some 3-year grants lately. I know that police department is working on some grants for their police trainees that is 1 or 2 years, or when, we have trainees in the program. So it's just kind of what's available at the time. But I know that our departments are definitely on the hunt all the time. Okay. All right. So salaries and wages probably makes up about 75%, or all personnel services make about 75% of the entire expenditure budget. So I'll probably spend a little bit more time on those items. So as I mentioned before, the 25 forecast numbers are based on the process. We've established some positions. We've discussed COLA, and we've put those numbers into our budgeting system. And so these are sort of real numbers, and we'll refine them, positions as we go through the budget process. But these are a fairly good representation of what you would see in the budget document in a month's time. So some of the variations that you're seeing, so obviously if you remember fiscal year 23 actual, we had a significant number of vacancies in positions at the end of that fiscal year. So those numbers were far below what we had budgeted for 24. 24 budget assumed all vacant positions were filled. Any vacant positions, those employees had full benefit, healthcare benefits for family plans, full family plans. So you can see that there is a significant difference in those two numbers because of those vacancies. Our 24 expectations are not yet to our budget number because we still are filling those vacancies. We're still working on filling those positions. And then 25, most significantly, again, we're filling those vacancies. We're assuming full family plan for any vacant positions, and we've added about 14 positions to this budget, this forecast at this point in time. Next slide, please. So this is just a history of the COLAs that we've had for the city by benefit group. In the forecast document, we've assumed a 3% COLA for all groups except for police command because they have a settled contract through the end of the fiscal year with 4%. So we've applied 4% to those employees. And then we have one other contract that is settled also at 3%. And so then we've assumed 3% for all remaining contracts, and those will go into negotiations starting in spring. For outer years, we assume a 2% COLA plus an additional 1% increase for employees that are still in steps. So every wage band has a 8-step scale. So if someone is at step 4, we assume that they've moved to step 5 in the future budget year. So this is just a history of those forecasts. The yellow numbers are the ones that are not settled yet. Next slide.
I'm sorry, I have a question about the previous slide, the
let's go back.
Why does the sidewalk and CDBG amounts go down so much?
Sorry, what? The previous slide?
Expenditure discussion, yeah. The sidewalk program, hazardous and CDBG.
So I can skip to that. I mean, okay. So there's a couple components to the sidewalk programs. We've got hazardous and then we've got CDBG. So specifically for CDBG, it fluctuates based on whatever the available funding is. And there was also some timing issues of ARPA sidewalks versus CDBG sidewalks. So the 24 expectation is kind of the 23 project that rolled into 24, and then we're sort of resetting for 25. And so the 92,000 was, I think, our first blush at what we're going to get in 25. We don't have those hard numbers yet, but we're always sort of in the $100,000 range, and so then we did $100,000 out into the future.
Okay.
I will talk about operating expenses in more detail. All right, so let's skip to the positions slide. So this is just giving you an idea of the 14 positions that or 15 positions that are adding, and then the one position that was recommended to be removed by their department. Any questions on that? We can move on.
These are not 14 new positions. These are 14 positions that, well, some may be new, but
So these are 14 positions that were not in last year's budget. Or sorry, last year, depends on where your brain is. The 24 budget, they were not in the 24 budget.
so does that mean that they're all new lines, or are some of those lines that were just unfilled because they were vacant because people left?
No, these are in addition to
In
all those
addition.
vacant positions.
Okay.
So new FTE.
Got it.
New FTEs.
All right,
These
thank
would
you.
be proposed, is that correct?
Proposed, yes.
Okay.
Well, then one question, because we already hired the intern, so did we have
There are a
authority
few
to do
positions
that?
that are hired, yes, but they were not in the 24 budget.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, next slide, please. All right, so as I mentioned, so we're moving on to the supplemental DB retirement line. So as you can see, the fiscal year 24 number is significantly higher than prior or current or future years, and that is the matching amount to that pension grant that we received. We were required to immediately, well, it was actually directly sent to MERS. It never even came to the city, so it was contributed right to our pension plan. It went into a surplus division. So currently we're leaving it in the surplus division, which will help our funding percentage. It won't have a direct impact on our required contributions in the near term, but will help that funding ratio in the future.
I'm
So-
sorry, you just totally lost me.
Okay.
What, are you on some line?
Supplemental
It says-
DB
Okay, so when
retirement.
you say surplus, that's the supplemental DB retirement?
Nope. So when we contribute supplemental pension payments to MERS, we can contribute them directly to a division, or we can contribute them to a surplus division. So we have all of our police, fire divisions that are DB divisions in our MERS pension plan. So we can directly apply them to that division and reduce the unfunded liability, which has an immediate impact on our required contribution in the next year. If we, I'm doing the best I can. I'm not an actuary, I'm not a MERS representative. If we contribute to the surplus division, that helps our funding ratio in totality, but it doesn't impact our required contributions in the next year. It's helping you in the future, not in the near term, because we're trying not to push off the required contributions.
Okay, so I want to go back a step then. So there's a certain legally required, because of our vote on the income tax, there's a certain percentage that goes for pensions.
Correct. So
And then can I just finish the question? And then it's my understanding, in the last 2 years anyway, we've allocated additional monies on top of that to go to the pension fund deficit, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of what you were just saying, are you talking about the first of those, what I'm going to call the automatic payment for the income tax, or the second, or both of them? When you say we're making those payments those supplemental DB retirements payments. Do you understand my question?
I think so. So we've made supplemental payments required by the income tax directly from the income tax fund. That 60% requirement comes directly out of the income tax. We've also made supplemental pension payments out of the general fund. Historically, we've always contributed it to a division, regardless of it's from the income tax or from the general fund.
Okay.
The state grant, MERS chose to have this surplus division because the point of the grant was to help our funding ratio. So putting it in a surplus division helps our funding ratio. So that's why that choice was made. We
Okay,
can
so-
take it
but
out.
The question I have is, was it both of those components were put into that choice? The income tax component plus the extra payment?
I don't understand.
It's three different things. George.
My understanding is the grant from MERS on pension went into a surplus account.
Yep.
But the city's supplemental have been going into divisions.
Correct.
All right, so it's really what Mr. Meadows said, it's three different things?
Well, the two are going into divisions, right? The income tax and the city's excess contribution from the general fund are going into divisions.
Correct.
And only the money from the state grant went into a surplus. But we are talking about changing that strategy to put more into the surplus to force our hand on the maintaining the required contribution so that we buy down that unfunded liability quicker. Because the more we put into the division, it reduces our annual required contribution year over year. And then we don't gain ground. But if we put it into the surplus, it buys down the overall unfunded liability, but not the annual required contribution.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean for us to get out in the weeds. That's a very good discussion for us to have later. But
Can I
Long-
confirm one thing, though?
Yeah.
The grant is a one-time grant.
One time,
Okay.
yes. And so then outer years are showing zero in the general fund because we're assuming that the income tax is still going to make that approximately $5 million. And this $5 million number is a little arbitrary, but it's sort of been the number that we've used to help us make ground on that unfunded liability. And based on our valuation, there is some information that says that we'll make progress by doing $3 million of supplemental. So we feel like the $5 million is doing the work. So again, it's all coming from the income tax. It's required, the 60% is required to come out of that income tax. So that's still happening regardless of what we make in a decision for the general fund. But at the moment, we're choosing not to make any additional from the general fund. So then the next significant item that I want to talk about is the health insurance actives number. So similar to wages, it is impacted by vacant positions in 23, continuing into 24, and assuming that 25 is going to be fully filled positions and everyone is going to have a full family plan. We know that may not be true, but we want to be conservative because we don't really know, and they're very expensive plans. So the other component of that is that the city uses an insurance fund to house all of our insurance costs, and we charge a manual premium to our departments based on their census or their population. So while we are seeing minimal rate increases in the last few years from our carriers, last year we felt like we had to kind of more significantly increase our internal rates because we had charged ourselves a little bit less because we had some reserves in the insurance fund and we wanted to provide a little relief during COVID to the general fund. Well, now the insurance fund has used some of those reserves. Those premium rates are starting to increase, so we feel like we have to charge ourselves, starting to phase that in, charge ourselves more starting last year, and continue that phase in of charging ourselves more to really meet where our true premium costs are coming in from our carriers. Now, the one other item that is happening this year is we know that effective with fiscal year 25, we will be switching our healthcare provider. We don't know who that's going to be, but we know it's not going to be McLaren. So we've got some preliminary guesses from our team at Gallagher, and they've said, we could expect something between 5 and 8%. So just know that that's on the horizon, but it's a very big unknown. So we're trying to kind of meet our current costs by charging these rates to help support our insurance fund and make sure that we're maintaining our reserves in that fund. So let me pause there on personnel services. Any other questions in the personnel section before I move on to operating?
No, but I'd like to go back just one item because you're proposing to reduce by about $3 million the general fund supplemental into the pension fund. And as we go through this process, I want to know exactly where that money is going that would have gone into that, where we're going to use that in the upcoming year, or proposed to be used in the upcoming year. That was part of the projection of the passage of the income tax, was this additional general fund contribution would be necessary to meet the objectives of the reason that we decided that we would go to the income tax in order to attack the unfunded liability. And so I'm going to need some more information with regard to that. Just a heads up.
I have a general question on the budget, the planned budget process. Is when the departments or Mr. Bellman, when you present a recommended budget, are you going to talk about these strategy implications? Mm-hmm. Okay. Just.
That's a yes for the record.
I'm sorry, yes.
So then in the remaining expenditure categories, I think the next thing I was going to talk about was probably in the sidewalk program, which we already discussed. So the other component to that is the hazardous program. So ARPA funds have been able to support the hazardous program, where we've done a 50% match with homeowners and then the ARPA funds. So the program has been about $500,000 of cost shared between homeowners and the grant. In outer years, we're doing very small miscellaneous hazardous repairs which did not have homeowner co-share, so that program may need to be expanded depending on availability of funds. All right. Then one other item that I wanted to mention was under the transfers. You'll see in fiscal year 25, the transfers to the Parks and Recreation Fund. They've requested an increase based on their preliminary budget adjustments. Okay, let me start over. Based on their preliminary budget estimates, and it's primarily due to some wage adjustments that occurred in fiscal year 24. We're going to continue to work on refine those numbers during the budget review process, so it may not end up being that 13% number, but just know that based on their kind of preliminary program look, they're going to be needing additional funds from the general fund. Typically, we've done a 2 to 3% CPI increase to all of our transfers, but obviously their program felt like they needed a little bit more. So then that's everything I have on expenditures. I do want to talk a little bit about that accumulated fund balance. So at the bottom of this numbers, you can see the kind of yellow highlighted number is the use or addition to fund balance in any particular year in the forecast. And obviously the 24 expectation is to the positive $9.9 million as a direct result of the ARPA grant. So this is not, because the pension grant has a matching in and out, so that's not part of this. It is really to do with the ARPA funding of police and fire wages, because those are being applied to existing, it's not a supplemental program, it is existing wages, existing operations. So what this does is it kind of creates this reserve about $5.8 million, which you can kind of see below the purple line. So This will be used for future projects, upcoming future discussions, but we will try and hold it in a reserve so that whether it becomes an expenditure in a future year or it's held in this reserve in a future year, you can see the impact on that available fund balance number. So that available fund balance number is really what we want to focus on. And you can see right below that is the percent of operating expenditures, and council has a policy that this should stay between 10 and 20%. And you can see as we get towards the final year, we're starting to be below that 10%. And then also provided is this months of operations. GFOA has a best practice of having 2 months in your available fund balance, and so you can see how that tapers off towards the outer years of the forecast. So knowing that there are, uncertainties, and as our expenses are outpacing our revenues, that's the situation. So we'll need to address some of those issues as they arise and as we get to those future years, and as those revenue sources become available or not, as the case may be. So if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see that revenue versus expense number a little bit more directly. And then that gray line is the trend of the fund balance, and then below the graph is that amount of addition to or use of fund balance. So again, just a different way to look at the forecast numbers. So any other items that are grabbing you on the operating expenditures or revenue numbers?
Any other questions?
I do have a
Go ahead,
question.
please.
So, cycling back to the pension payments, there was a statement in the version of this report online suggesting that we expect our required payments to the pension fund to level off at some point in the future. Do we know when that is?
It depends on if we continue to make contributions directly to divisions or if we go the strategy of using the surplus division. So one helps us with our near-term required contributions. It's sort of more of a budgetary, but it pushes that goalpost down the road a little bit. So it just depends on the strategy, and of course it depends on MERS changing their assumptions, which they have a tendency to do every 3 years. So.
And are we going to have a chance to talk about that strategy at some point?
It sounded like.
Of course.
Yes.
Okay.
So I also mentioned previously, I want MERS to come and present the annual actuarial evaluation to you and to talk about projections, assumptions, because that dovetails well into the budget and the overall funding strategy, what's the best approach, and how do we capitalize on those income taxes from now until they expire to ensure we're buying down the unfunded liability.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Good job.
I just have a comment.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just comment. First, wrapping my head around such large numbers has been one of the hardest things to understand and make decisions on as a council person. And so not being, for our public, not being able to have like the presentations accessible, I just wanted to ask, when the presentations aren't available for the public to follow along with, if we could just let us know why it wasn't able to be attached prior to that, or that it can't be attached right now, just so that we're clear, because it's hard to follow as it is, and as like a visual reader, it's helpful to have both of these presentations. And the other thing I wanted to point out is on page 4 of what is available online under risk, uncertainties, and vulnerabilities, the second thing mentioned is the Russia-Ukraine and the Israeli-Hamas conflict. And so I want to mention again, for those who believe that the city of East Lansing should not be weighing in on conflict overseas, you are dead wrong on it. And it's even mentioned in our financial forecast.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay. Consent agenda. Mr. City Manager.
A total of 6 items on tonight's consent agenda. First one is 4.1, to approve the following appointment or reappointments to boards and commissions. Appoint Julie Ludden to the Downtown Management Board for a partial term ending December 31st, 2027. 4.2 is approve a resolution recognizing Forster Woods Adult Day Services as a nonprofit organization located in the city of East Lansing for the purpose of obtaining a charitable gaming license from the Michigan Lottery Bureau. 4.3 is approve a change order with MKSK for the non-motorized plan update for the study of local street traffic and to identify traffic calming options in an amount of $36,000 and to authorize the city manager to sign. 4.4 is cancel a public hearing previously set for March 5th, 2024 to consider a request to construct a single-story, multi-tenant retail building with drive-through window and parking lot at 210, 218, and 224 West Lake Lansing Road. The applicant has requested a delay to complete a traffic impact statement. 4.5 is approve a conditional Class 3 rental license for up to 2 unrelated persons or a family at 428 430 Stoddard Avenue. The owner with assessing records is JT Spartan Properties LLC, East Lansing. The owner applicant is Taylor Teachout, East Eaton Rapids, Michigan. And then 4.6 is first reading of ordinance 1532, amendments to the East Lansing Youth Commission ordinance, and set a public hearing for March 5th, 2024.
I'll move that with one slight amendment in 4.6 to eliminate the public hearing, which is not required, and place it on the business agenda for March 5th, 2024.
Mr. City Attorney?
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, with that motion as amended, with the amended motion, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes
I've got
unanimously.
some questions, some discussion questions, that's all. I'm not pulling anything.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is about item 4.6. And so who is on the committee to change the ordinance?
The commission reviewed the changes to the ordinance and then recommended them. The youth commission.
So does that mean that there was a vote?
Yes.
And does that mean that they had a conversation or that some things were shown to them and and they had a yes or no?
They conversed about it. They talked about each of the items.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. I'm curious about this process too for the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission, because there's been some questions regarding the commissioner openings that are available for people that are not City of East Lansing residents. And so it sounds like if the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission has a discussion and then are in agreement that we can go ahead and put it in front of council for us to reconsider some parts of our ordinance as well. Am I hearing that correctly?
My answer is I don't know. So I guess that's something we'll have to take a look at.
So I'm asking whoever does know, because we are here doing this for the Youth Commission. And so we also have our East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission that has a vacancy right now. And there were some questions and some commissioners that did want some change based on the ordinance. So it sounds like if we follow the same process, that we can get this in front of council as well.
I don't know what you're referring to because I haven't seen anything from them yet. So
that's fine.
When I see it, I'll refer it potentially to the city attorney for an opinion. I just don't know what they're recommending or doing. So I'm sorry.
So my question then is for the city attorney. So this youth commission had a discussion and they want to change the ordinance, and then it's going to go in front of council. East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission is interested in doing the same thing. So this is the process. We can talk about it, we can submit changes and amendments, and then it can go in front of council.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the council liaison was present when they made the request for changes and brought those back to council.
Thank you.
And so, of course, we haven't acted on those changes yet.
For the Youth Commission?
Correct.
Yeah, I know that.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Anything else on the consent agenda?
It's
All
really
those-
quiet in here.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, item 5.1, public hearing, consideration of the request from Mullen Family Investments LLC to add 4 parking spaces, a new service shed with paved drive access, and retaining walls, walkways, and other site features at 2111 Merritt Road. Recognizing what I thought to be the sense of the council last time, I'm not going to open the public hearing until we've had a chance to ask questions of our staff person. After we've exhausted that process, then I'll open the public hearing. So, do you want to present to us?
I'd love to. I think that the summary that you presented is exactly right. This has been to the Planning Commission on December 13th for a public hearing, in which there was no public comment. And then the Planning Commission voted unanimously on the 10th of January to recommend approval by the City Council of this proposal. A couple things that I just want to mention in my staff report, I neglected to remove a sentence that said the landscape plan has not been submitted. It has been. It's page 138. Excuse me, 138 of your packet. So the landscape plan has been submitted. It is generally compliant with the zoning ordinance, and also one more thing, that the applicant has confirmed that the plantings that they intend to use, any new plantings will be low maintenance and native plantings, and also they do intend to introduce 1 EV charging station somewhere in the parking lot. I'm just not sure exactly where. I think that they're currently discussing that amongst themselves, and the applicant or a representative is here tonight to speak to that if you have questions on that. Are there any specific questions that I can answer?
Questions for staff?
I do have a couple of comments concerning the EV charger. I think possibly best directed at the applicant. However, you'd like to handle that, Mayor?
Now's the time to ask questions of staff before we open the public hearing. So it's your choice.
I have no questions for staff. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Seeing no questions for staff, I will open the public hearing for consideration of the request from Mullen Family Investments LLC to add 4 parking spaces, a new service shed with paved drive access, and retaining walls, walkways, and other site features at 2111 Merritt Road. Does anybody want to present to us in the public hearing?
Hello, AJ Patrick with Kebs Incorporated, 2116 Hazlitt Road in Hazlitt. I'm the civil engineer that designed the site plans. They were doing some, just to give background on the project, they are putting a surgery center in the upper floor and need to have barrier-free access to that upper floor, which currently it does not. So we're adding the 4 parking spaces up front to get barrier-free access closer to the building and to that entrance. We're redoing sidewalks throughout the development to make them handicap accessible, adding handrails. There is some issues with the parking lot as far as perch water underneath it that is causing it to heave and crack up too fast. So we're putting under drainage systems throughout the parking lot. At the same time, they're going to mill and repave it. And take that opportunity to put in the new parking spaces. Right now, there is no dumpster enclosure on the dumpster, so we're adding that to the plan, and they would like to add a maintenance building to the site. With all of these features, there's also some paving added to it, so we're putting in some infiltration swales to take care of that additional water that would run off. And the rear part of the building, the grassed area in there between the building and the detention pond that's there is very marshy. So we're putting some under drain piping throughout that along with the infiltration swales to try and dry that up a bit during rain events and anytime that the water table is high. The EV charger, they're currently just looking at where that's going to fall in line with the electrical improvements that they're doing, and the easiest, most cost-effective place to put that, most likely it would be up front in one of those 4 front parking spaces.
Questions for the applicant? Yes, sir.
If I might. So this complex there is really sort of an ideal location for a level 2 charger because you have tenants where clients will go for an hour or two for a procedure of some sort or a service of some sort, which is sort of an ideal amount of charging time. So I think this is a very good application for a level 2 charger, and the ordinance requires a single, but they might want to consider putting in 2. And I also wanted to suggest that they at least consider the possibility of investing in a DC fast charger at that location. There are no DC fast chargers in the vicinity in that corner of the city. And it's right adjacent to Saginaw Highway, which is a draw. And it's right adjacent to Costco, where people drive from a ways away. And so somebody who needs fast charging will be attracted to a place like that if they're driving from 40, 50, 60 miles away. I have not done market research on this myself. I can't promise that it would pay off because DC fast chargers are not cheap, but it might. And I would encourage you or the owners to at least consider that possibility.
Right.
And then monetize it, obviously.
Right, right.
Any other questions for the applicant? I have a few. So I thought I heard tonight somebody say that you were going to be adding a surgical suite to this site?
I believe so, on the upper floor, yes.
Okay, it doesn't currently have a surgical suite, correct?
I believe it has a medical office. I don't believe it's a surgical.
Okay. And is this a state licensed surgical suite?
Yes.
You know that for sure?
No.
Okay.
I believe so, yes. I'm going by memory from conversations with the owner, and I do believe that it is a state certified surgical suite, but I can check on that.
And what have you been doing about, quote, maintenance, end quote? What has the applicant been doing about, quote, maintenance, end quote, up until now?
Maintenance of the site?
Well, there isn't a separate building for maintenance now, correct?
No, they have been having it off-site. They have a contract with parish corporations to do maintenance on the site, and I believe their offices are about 15 minutes away. Putting this building there allows stuff to be stored to maintain the site at a closer distance.
Owned by parish or owned by the people that own this?
I believe it'll be owned by the people that own this building.
1,500 square foot maintenance building? It's pretty big, isn't it? That's bigger than my barn down at my farm in Indiana.
Right.
I can put tractors and combines and wildcats and mice and a whole lot of things in my barn. So I was having trouble on this schematic, and it's just me. Where is this maintenance building going to be?
It would be in the upper left on that plan.
Okay, so it's
Off the back end of the
essentially
parking
something you're going to be seeing from Saginaw Highway.
It is going to be inset into the hill. The
Okay.
side that's facing up against Saginaw is going to be buried.
Okay, so you're going to have some sort of is it going to be ground or a fence or what is it going to be there? Do you know?
I believe it's maybe 2 feet of the wall that would be exposed, and then it goes to the roof.
Okay. So your owners are not having any problem building something that obscures something from Saginaw Highway, apparently. I'm just talking about something else that we have in
Okay.
front of us. Okay, that helps me a little bit. I don't have any other questions. Thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Barley, I have a question for you. Isn't there some sort of separate criteria from a planning standpoint for a licensed surgical center in our city?
The building is currently used for medical, dental, professional offices, and this would be considered part of the medical office. So it'd be,
Do you really know that?
yes.
Okay, because I think, I mean, I'm just asking, but if this is going to be a surgical suite, we have a surgical suite right down on Abbott Road. Surgical suites are springing up other places in surrounding town, but I just kind of wonder if there's some specific zoning criteria for a surgical suite. My understanding of a surgical suite is people can be put under in a surgical suite. I'm not talking about a dental office where that happens. I'm talking about a surgical suite. Where you, and I don't know what doctors these are. I think one of my kids went here at some point a long time ago, but so I'm just kind of curious about that one.
Our zoning ordinance currently doesn't differentiate between medical office uses and surgery. So it would be considered part of the medical office use that's currently on the property.
Medical services require a certificate of need from the State Department of Health, and I'm wondering whether that might be, that is not mentioned in our ordinances?
No, there's no differentiation between surgery and medical.
Maybe we should take a look at that going forward at least.
If I may ask, is there a specific concern about surgical suites or something that you'd prefer to see in ordinance language that would, I guess, define a surgical suite versus medical? We can certainly look at introducing an amendment if needed.
And it may be in this situation. I mean, it's not even in our materials that I saw. I think somebody just mentioned it verbally. Maybe I missed something in materials, but there's a specific licensing. Mr. Meadows is correct. There's a certificate of need process and a specific licensing process. And I just think that we ought to take a look at that. If it's something that's a state licensed facility in some fashion, then maybe we ought to think that through. So, but you do think there's going to be a surgical suite, right?
I believe so. I mean, I'm just the civil
I mean, that's
engineer.
really
I'm
what
not
they're
the-
adding on the top floor, correct? A surgical suite.
They're renovating the top floor for a surgical suite, yes.
And for clarity, you all, it would be, if it is a surgical suite, somewhere in a local ordinance, we would want to double check that they are licensed through the state. Like that's, because it's
Going
upon
forward,
the state.
If we don't have that now, we should
Look
probably
at
add that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Anybody else in the audience want to speak to this public hearing? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. What's the pleasure of the council? Do you want to defer this to another meeting? Okay, there's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
There's a second, but I would add, subject to the 9 conditions specified in our packet.
Okay, any discussion?
Will you say that again? I didn't hear you.
Subject to a friendly amendment that the approval is subject to the 9 conditions specified in our packet.
Yeah, I think we've sort of run into this problem in the past with certificate of need, and I think it was with the Abood project on Saginaw there, the back facility, because there was I think an MRI, a portable MRI put back there at one point in time. I think there was a question about the certificate of need with regard to that. So we do need to take a look at that going forward. But I think for this, at this moment in time, I don't have a problem voting for this.
Well, I do, because I don't know what we're exactly approving here, so I would be willing, if somebody wants to amend the motion, to add an additional condition that the activities in the building must comply with all applicable state statutes concerning medical practice and/or surgical centers or something like that. I'm not going to make that amendment, but unless somebody can figure that one out, I'm not going to vote for it tonight, for that reason.
Okay, well, I'll take that as a friendly amendment. That we add condition number 10, that they demonstrate prior to beginning construction that they've obtained their certificate of need from the state of Michigan.
And/or any other necessary state licensing.
Exactly what I was
Okay.
going to say, yeah.
Okay. All right, I can live with that one.
Okay, so my question is, in this 10th is a standard ask.
The certificate of need?
Yeah.
Yes. It's a
Okay.
state statute. Yep.
Okay, and we standardly, the person is able to produce this in the time frame that we're asking them to.
Right, they demonstrate they will have the customers necessary and their participation, and then they get the certificate of need.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
If I may, the intent of condition number 7 would be to cover that it project is designed and developed in accordance with all applicable state and local statutes, codes, and regulations. So,
Does that satisfy you, George?
Which one is it?
that's condition number 7. This would be on page 5 of 6 of the staff report, saying that the project shall be designed and developed in accordance with all applicable state and local statutes, codes, and regulations.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that's specific enough in this situation, so. I will vote for it with the additional condition, but otherwise not. But you guys can go ahead and pass it. It's not a big deal.
All right, well, we have the additional condition on this motion at this point in time, so you okay with that? Okay, we've got the friendly amendment, and that's where we're at this moment.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, which moves us to item 6.1, consideration of policy resolution 2024-4, canceling city council regular meetings scheduled for April 2nd, 2024, and scheduling other meetings in April. Mr. City Manager?
Sure. So your schedule you adopted last year for 2024 includes a regular session on April 2nd, 2024. And the charter requires the preliminary budget be presented to you at your first regular session in April. And we're not going to be in a position to prepare and submit that preliminary budget. So I'm recommending we cancel the April 2nd meeting, make the April 9th meeting a regular board meeting or council meeting in which the preliminary budget will be presented. You'll have your subsequent April 16th meeting as a regular session, and then add April 23rd as a discussion-only / budget work session.
Okay, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Motion by Meadows. Is there a second? Second by Singh. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item 6.2, consideration of a one-year contract extension with Levitt and Stark Excavating, Inc. for the as-needed and emergency contractor work in an amount not to exceed $2 million, and authorize the city manager to sign. Also authorize the city manager to sign the remaining one-year contract extensions up to the approved not-to-exceed dollar amount. Staff?
All right, what you have before you, as the agenda item states, is a one-year contract extension to Levitt and Stark for an as-needed and emergency contractor services contract. This contract came about in 2016, actually prior to 2016, due to some significant underground infrastructure failures that we were unaware of. We had to bring contractors on board without bidding, just the nature of the they were sewer failures, and we didn't have the time to bid the project. We didn't have any contracts of this nature at the time. So as a result of that, in 2016, we came up with this contract so that we would have no promised work, but we'd have unit prices, we'd have subcontractor markups, material markups, all that kind of stuff negotiated. So when those issues came up, we could call this contractor and get the work completed expeditiously. What we did find also is there's several projects that come up that lend themselves to a time and material type of contract. So in 2019, when we rebid the contract, we added the as-needed part of it. The latest contract was bid in 2021 and awarded in January of 2022, and we've been using it primarily on the as-needed basis for lead service line replacements, which is a perfect example of a project that's better dealt with time and material. As you're aware from a presentation a few council meetings ago, what basement finishes, type of landscaping, all those kind of things dramatically impact the project. So being able to adjust and do a time and material type of contract is exactly why we added the as-needed part. Up until this point, we have not put a dollar figure on the award of this contract because it was primarily emergency service work and we really didn't know what was going to come upon us. In this particular case, we've identified through our inventory efforts just over 300 galvanized and lead service lines that we'd like to start tackling proactively. Typically, up until this point, we've been doing them as we found ones that have been leaking or ones that we've discovered during other construction contracts. Now we'd like to proactively go after the 300 plus service lines that we're aware of and start proactively replacing those, which is why we asked for the $2 million. It's an expensive endeavor. These are between, I think it's between $4,000 and $8,000 per service. By the time we pay the contractor to bore the new service up, we have to have a licensed plumber go in and replumb, sometimes halfway across the house, depending on where we can get access. So these vary wildly in cost per address. So the $2 million is meant to fund that effort as well as any emergency projects that would come along. And this is being funded through fund balance in the water fund. A lot of it through delayed projects we couldn't get off the ground either due to the COVID delay or just lack of staffing to get projects in the queue. So there's money there to cover the cost. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Mr. Altman?
This is a more efficient way to spend money than doing it the sort of emergency approach that you described earlier, right? I mean, getting the unit pricing in and so forth is benefits us in the long term.
Yes, well, by bidding this, we have negotiated prices that
Right.
they have to charge for the different various work.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Go ahead, please.
And this leads into, planning and reporting. So it's not necessarily specifically, but the 335 lines that we've identified thus far, I would love to ensure that we have an update on how the process is going to replace those. I know there's a new federal requirement that they have to be replaced in a certain timeline, but as it relates to a dashboard of sorts as those get replaced.
And we are working on a public-facing map that will show progress, how many have been replaced, all of that.
Okay, good.
It's actually a requirement that we have that up and running by October.
Okay, great.
So we'll have that up and you'll be able to see right on the website
Okay.
what's been replaced, how many are still out there, where we still have unknowns, all that kind of stuff.
Are we replacing any between now and October?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
The requirement is they be replaced over a 20-year period, but we obviously want to do it much faster than that. Our goal is to have these known ones done in 3 years.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Do we have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Go ahead. A second from, move approval of a one-year contract extension with Levitt and Stark Excavating Inc. for the as-needed and emergency contractor work in an amount not to exceed $2 million, and authorize the city manager to sign, also authorize the city manager to sign the remaining one-year contract extensions up to the approved not to exceed dollar amount. Moved by Altman, seconded by Watson. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. And council, I may have gotten confused, so and maybe I've got the wrong agenda here, but I have on my agenda 6.3, consideration of amendments to the Youth Commission ordinance, but didn't. Consent agenda? Okay. Nobody told me, but that's okay. 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 That concludes, I think, our business agenda. Do we have a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
I think. Yeah, you need to state it.
I move that council now move into closed session.
You have to read that. specific
Where's it at?
language.
Oh, okay. The city attorney requests a closed session pursuant to MCL 15.268 1H to discuss attorney-client privilege memoranda that are exempt from disclosure pursuant to MCL 15.243 1G.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, do we need a roll call? We do, don't we? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Altman,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh,
Yes.
Mayor Brookover.
Yes. Okay, we're going to adjourn to the, I guess, executive conference room. Audience will be back when we come out of closed session to conclude the meeting or take any further action. Do we have a motion to come out of closed session? Moved by Altman, second by Meadows. Do we need roll call on this? Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion is unanimous. Do we have any further motions for tonight?
Yes. I would like to, see if I can get this correct. I move under the appropriate MCL to make a motion to release the memo with waiving privilege for the memo other than names. How'd I do, Tony?
So would that be a motion to waive the attorney-client privilege on the investigative report dated October 31st, 2023, and issued by J. Randall second time, with the exception of maintaining the privilege on individuals' names?
That was said perfectly.
Okay.
Okay, is there a second?
Would you accept, can I do a friendly amendment, or does it have to be seconded first?
It has to be seconded first, I think, in this case.
I can second?
Sure,
All
second.
right. Would you accept a friendly amendment to take out the gender references?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you for the Mr. and Mrs.?
And the
before- prior to
she's and the
names?
he's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, gender references either by salutary or pronoun, I think is what we're talking about here. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, any other discussion on that motion? It's been moved and seconded with a friendly amendment that the investigation report, independent review investigation report, be released in its entirety except for redactions of all individuals' names and references to gender. Have I stated that correctly, ladies?
Correct.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion?
Yes, I have actually a motion to amend the motion. My motion would be to replace that language with a motion to waive any privilege that applies to the report authored by Randall Suckenteen pursuant to a contract entered into him by and interim city manager on behalf of the city of East Lansing on April 27, 2023, and release such report to the public by providing access to a complete unredacted copy of the report on the city's website by Friday, February 23, 2024.
I thought we had to vote on the motion on the floor first.
No, actually, we have to vote on the second, or on the amendment first. Okay. Is there a second to that amendment?
I will second that amendment.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment?
I'm still confused. I'm confused. So we don't have to vote down or up the First Amendment?
The first motion.
The first motion?
No,
We
that's
do
still-
not have to.
That's still on the floor, pending resolution of this motion. Correct, Mr. City Attorney?
Yeah, I think that's correct, but this vote would only be on whether that, by majority, that amendment to the underlying motion stands.
So if it fails, it goes back to the main motion. Okay.
Understood? So if the amendment passes, it essentially substitutes for the first motion. If it doesn't pass, then we move on to the first motion. Okay, any further discussion on the amended motion?
I've got discussion.
Go ahead.
I've got discussion. I won't be voting in favor of the amended motion because throughout my research and my thought processes, staff were told that their names would remain confidential. And after getting some research materials back on what staff was told, I still think it's fuzzy to have titles but not have staff names. But I am able to comprehend that supposedly staff's understanding was that their names would be kept confidential, but not their positions. So I won't be voting in favor of releasing everything in this report because of what we told staff was going to happen when they decided to participate in this investigation.
I'm sorry, you said you would be voting in favor of releasing everything? Or-
No, I will not be.
Okay,
Absolutely
I'm
not.
sorry, I misheard you. Okay, any other discussion on the amended motion?
I'll just respond to that, that the actual language provided to the employees was for those employees who choose to participate in a review, please note that confidentiality is not guaranteed.
Okay, any other discussion on the amended motion? I'd like to do a roll call on this. So, roll call on the amended motion, please.
Councilmember Altman,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh,
No.
Mayor Brookover.
No. All right, so now we're back to the main motion. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yep. My further discussion is we again had a pause because there was information that was possibly relayed to staff as far as the redaction of their name and or identities, which would be their positions. And so I'm sorry if we're making this decision for the people that walked into the investigation under the thought process that their names and their positions would not be revealed. But since there is some writing that implies that possibly names were redacted but not positions. And I've said, as a public official, I thought I knew what I said could possibly make it, but it didn't. None of what I said made it to the report, nor was I circled back to on parts that did make it to the report. And so that's all the discussion I have to say for now.
Okay, any other discussion on the main motion? Okay, I'd like to do a roll call vote on this also, please.
Councilmember Altman,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh,
Yes.
Mayor Brookover.
No. Motion passes 3-2. Anything else for tonight? Could we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Meadows, second by Altman. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thanks, folks, for coming tonight.